Good afternoon, members. Today we're joined by First Minister, Deputy First Minister and indeed junior ministers to reflect on the work of the committee and the delivery of the programme for government targets which are attached to OFMDFM. We'll also have a briefing on progress in relation to victims and survivors issues, and we will also give consideration to two written briefings, both from the department, one on the consultation on the active ageing strategy and the other on progress on the sexual orientation strategy. We've received apologies from Jimmy Spratt. Jimmy's in Limavady with the Regional Development Committee, which he chairs. Megan Fearon, who is with the Eddy Committee in the United States, and Alec Maskey is attending a funeral today. No word on Alex Atwood, but we anticipate he will join us. And Alex Maskey has joined us. So we'll cancel your apology.
No, further than this meeting.
Yeah. So members, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of us. I would have thought we were being told that FM needs to leave around 3:30. So that should leave after opening remarks 5 to 10 minutes per member. So that hopefully is a reasonable amount of time for questioning. I'll try not to interfere, but 10 minutes I think is certainly going to be the upper limit for any individual. Otherwise they're going to be censoring time or eating into time of others. So if you're content, members, we'll leave the rest of the business, minutes of meetings and the rest till later, and we'll get straight down to business.
Yep.
At page 5 of your packs, members, you've got the clerk's brief, and blue folders have been updated as well to reflect the most up-to-date programme for government papers. Okay. 10, 11, 12, 13.
You count them in and count them out.
No, some are members of the public. So, committee, we welcome today the First Minister, the Deputy First Minister, and the two junior ministers. You're all very welcome. And we'll set aside 5 minutes each for the principals if they would like to make some opening remarks. Mr. Robinson.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the welcome and for the invitation to brief the committee. As members will be aware, Martin and I are committed to driving progress on the programme for government as co-chairs of the programme board. We view this role as providing both a challenge and support function, examining areas in which difficulties have already arisen, identifying issues affecting delivery, and then to direct efforts and, where necessary, resources to driving progress. In this capacity, we're regularly briefed on progress against commitments across all departments at a strategic level, most recently on the 19th of June. When we introduced the programme for government to the Assembly, we acknowledged that the success of this executive will be judged on its capacity to deliver for local people. 2 years later, we are proud to stand by our record of delivery in that period. A suite of activities with the level of complexity and ambition of the programme for government cannot be summarised by 1 or 2 numbers. That said, progress to date has been excellent, with performance meeting or exceeding targeted levels for 78% of PFG commitments. We appreciate that the committee doesn't want a sugar-coated report focusing on areas where performance is very strong, and I can reassure members that we are equally clear that a focus on continuous improvement in performance is absolutely essential. With that in mind, I'd like to highlight some of the key areas within the programme where we're making a real difference to the lives of people here. We identified 5 big commitments in the PFG. Of these, the first was to contribute to rising levels of employment by supporting the promotion of over 25,000 new jobs. You'll be pleased to note that 23,783 jobs have been achieved to March of 2014 against a target for that period of time of 19,500. We also committed to increasing visitor numbers to 4.2 million and tourist revenue to £676 million by December of 2014. In 2013, these figures had reached 4.1 million visitors and 723 million revenue. We have reached and exceeded our revenue target 1 year early. One of the most important commitments was to reform and modernise the delivery of health and social care, hugely important given the value we place on health and well-being and the level of expenditure on health and social care, approximately £5 billion per annum. The HSCB has established 17 integrated care partnerships, which are now engaged in reviewing care pathways for the 4 initial priority areas. The available substantiated figures for excess bed days show that the PFG target in this area was being met in 12-13, and the target level of 10% reduction is achieved for the desired 2013-14 timeframe. In addition to the big commitments, we have made significant progress on a range of other commitments with an economic focus. For example, in terms of the economy, APD rates for long-haul flights from Northern Ireland were reduced to 0 from the 1st of January 2013. Funding for 467 additional STEM student places and further education have been put in place, and 99.8% of children whose parents engaged with the process to the end obtained a funded preschool place in each of the last 2 years. A hugely important development, both in promoting child development and in contributing to economic development by enabling parents to participate in the economy. In this programme for government, we made a very clear commitment to focus on social as well as economic objectives, notably through the Delivering Social Change framework and an associated package of £28 million signature programmes. 20 new nurture units are now in place, playing a key role in improving the lives and educational attainment of our most vulnerable children. Some 135 children are currently attending the units. By way of a suite of parenting support programmes, up to 1,200 new and existing families are receiving additional high-quality parenting support. Targets for the provision of new social and affordable homes have been exceeded, with 1,300 social and 1,200 affordable homes in 2013-14. £4.4 million has been invested in programmes to tackle obesity, potentially impacting on the future health and well-being of people across Northern Ireland. Through the programme for government, we have acted decisively in order to protect and enhance the environment. Specific achievements include a levy on single-use carrier bags has been introduced, and work on the extension and increase of the levy in 2015 in accordance with the wishes of the Assembly is already in hand. A statutory marine management scheme for Rathlin Island has been produced. Phase 1 of the upgrade to the Coleraine to Derry Londonderry line was completed in March of 2013, ahead of the April timetable. £390 million has been invested in sustainable transport in the programme for government period to March 2014, and the commitment to meet our PFG target of £500 million investment is on track for delivery. Water quality and wastewater standards set out in the programme have been met. One of the most challenging issues which we face is the promotion of a strong and united community. We are a single community, and despite the challenges of our history, it is crucial that we work together to achieve this end. The Together Building a United Community strategy, published on the 23rd of May, reflects the Executive's commitment to improving good relations and continuing the journey towards a more united and shared society. It commits to deliver a range of measures to build good relations and help create the conditions to progress further towards a prosperous, peaceful and safe society. The strategy marks a significant milestone in the Executive's work and represents a robust strategic framework for action against a number of priorities and actions. Members know what the key elements are. We want to create a society free from hate and intolerance. We want to encourage and facilitate joint service provision, greater sharing of resources, and we will bring down the barriers that artificially divide our society. The strategy envisages a united community based on equality of opportunity, the desirability of good relations and reconciliation, one which is strengthened by its diversity, where cultural expression is celebrated and embraced, and where everyone can live, learn, work and socialise together, free from prejudice, hate and intolerance. This will be a challenging enterprise, but one we are determined to see brought to fruition. It will benefit society now and lead to a better future for our young people. Through this strategy, we remain committed to addressing the complex issues arising from our past that still confront us as a society, and this is our best chance of leaving a legacy of good relations to future generations. We acknowledge and value the wealth of experience and expertise that has been built up over the years and now resides in community leaders, organisations and agencies. This strategy will provide the framework for this good practice to be developed and built upon over the coming years. Before I hand over to Martin, I think it's important to acknowledge that there are a small number of commitments which are affected by issues that could potentially result in a delay to delivery. Where delivery has fallen below target, we will continue to encourage progress and to focus on strong remedial and supportive action. You will appreciate that some of these issues are not within our control. One such issue is export figures. The 12-13 figures were disappointing as a result of the downturn in demand from traditional export markets in the Republic and Canada. While good progress has been made, it does not at this stage appear sufficient to recover the ground lost in 2012-13. We have continued our work to develop and grow export markets and promote inward investment by emerging countries such as Brazil and China, and this has begun to see its rewards in good export growth in 2013-14. Clearly, there are also a small number of commitments where we are working to achieve political consensus and where delivery against the original envisaged timescale will not be possible to achieve. As Martin and I have stated to the committee previously, we both remain committed to resolving these issues wherever we can. On that note, I'll hand over to Martin. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I too would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to update members on the progress being made on the programme for government. Officials have attended the committee in recent weeks to present detailed information on the work being progressed in support of the delivery of our commitments. It is useful to have this session also in order that the committee can be fully versed on the strategic considerations that bear upon this activity. As Peter indicated, there has been encouraging progress to date, but we are focused on achieving even more. I'd like to highlight a few of the areas of the programme for government that illustrate the delivery focus that has characterised the implementation of the period to date. First of all, I want to focus on our Big Five commitments. We committed to achieving some £1 billion of investment in the economy, to include £375 million as a result of foreign direct investment, £400 million from Indigenous businesses supported by InvestNI, and £225 million as a result of the Jobs Fund. I am delighted to report that, in fact, some £1.5 billion has been achieved to March 2014, exceeding our target by 50% 1 year early. This increased investment will benefit everyone, people, families and neighbourhoods. We also gave a commitment to support young people into employment by providing skills and training. Our target for delivery was 89,000 by March 2014, and by January 2014 we had achieved a very impressive 109,000. We have also put in place a range of measures to raise educational standards, including some measures targeted on our most disadvantaged pupils. Members, you will be aware that 225 graduate teachers have been appointed to improve levels of literacy and numeracy under delivering social change. While the impact of this particular programme may not be evident immediately, it is pleasing to see that already increased numbers of pupils are leaving school with 5+ GCSEs or equivalent at A* to C, including GCSEs, English and Maths. We're also maintaining a focus on achieving improved educational outcomes. By March 2014, 217 qualifications have been delivered in order to upskill the working age population, including further education, higher education and essential skills qualifications, again exceeding our programme for government commitment 1 year early. The commitments in the programme for government are there to enable everyone to grow and develop to their full potential. We have promoted and encouraged through the Delivering Social Change framework effective cross-departmental collaboration to drive through important initiatives which can achieve real and long-lasting social benefits for those in our society who need them most. The 6 Delivering Social Change signature programmes seek to focus on early interventions to get in early and tackle the root causes of issues before they have time to develop into more significant problems. Implementations of the 6 programmes is progressing well, and we are already starting to see positive outcomes through their practical delivery. For example, as I mentioned earlier, some 225 additional teachers are now in place in primary and post-primary schools, supporting children and young people who are struggling with English and Maths at critical stages in their education. Over 900 family members have already received support through an intervention to support young people not in education, employment or training. And up to 6,000 families are expected to benefit from the continued support provided to 16 existing family support hubs and the establishment of 10 new hubs. These hubs allow a local network of statutory, voluntary and community organisations to work together in partnership to signpost families with specific needs to appropriate services. And finally, 11 additional social enterprise incubation hubs are being established, offering a range of business advice and practical support to social enterprise entrepreneurs. A key element of delivering social change is the 80 million Social Investment Fund. You'll be pleased to hear that we continue to make steady progress and that we expect all of the expenditure to be committed by the end of this financial year. The first phase of the Bright Start childcare strategy was launched by ministers on the 25th of September 2013. The framework sets out a general direction of travel for the childcare strategy, while the 15 key first actions are an initial response to the childcare priorities identified during consultation and research. All 15 key first actions are now being taken forward. Most recently, actions 1, 2 and 5, which will be delivered through the Bright Start School Age Childcare Grant Scheme, which Junior Ministers Bell and McCann launched on the 27th of March 2014. The grant scheme will assist childcare settings serving disadvantaged and rural communities and settings based on the school's estate. The first round of applications to the grant scheme are currently being assessed, and it's envisaged that the first awards will be made in the autumn. 18,000 households have benefited from the Warm Home Scheme, helping to reduce household bills for some of the most vulnerable households, and commitments to ensure no increase in water charges and student fees have been delivered. In addition, 8 million has been invested in programmes to tackle rural poverty and social and economic isolation, and significant work is underway to relocate the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development central offices to a number of rural locations. Work is progressing to relocate Fisheries Division to South Down, Forest Service to County Fermanagh by June 2015, and Rivers Agency to Lochray campus by March 2016. The remainder of departmental headquarters will relocate to Ballykelly, where it's planned to have 400 workstations available by 2017, with a further 200 workstations available by 2020. Peter mentioned our desire to build a united community, and there is no doubt that this represents a huge challenge for all of us. The Together Building a United Community document represents the most ambitious good relations strategy ever produced here. It is also our best chance of leaving a legacy of good relations to future generations, and we must grasp this opportunity. Design groups to draw up detailed proposals to implement the strategy's 7 headline commitments have made significant progress already. These groups are working to ensure that the plans and proposals that are developed are robust and will deliver the outcomes identified in the strategy. This includes detailed engagement with stakeholders who have experience working in these areas and who will use the programmes or services when they are operational. Going beyond the strategy and the associated actions, there are a range of important commitments in the programme for government which can promote social cohesion. Building on the success of the 2012 Irish Open Championship, further announcements relating to the return of the championship and potentially the first major golf championship to take place here since 1951 demonstrate international confidence in our ability to host international standard golf events. Events such as this promote confidence among the whole community that things really are changing. In order to continue to deliver change, we will need to keep the pressure on to achieve public sector reforms. The recent elections to shadow councils are therefore an historic milestone that will support ever more effective and responsive public service delivery going forward. The transfer of investment functions to local government following 2015 provides an opportunity for locally elected representatives to deliver transformative change for their communities. I hope you will agree that the developments that we have outlined collectively represent a huge level of progress, Very often these achievements are not acknowledged, as there is mostly a focus on what is not working. As Peter has said, we will maintain our focus on delivering our programme for government commitments. Investments in childcare, tackling health problems, tackling rural poverty and isolation, protecting families against increases in student fees and water charges are delivering real benefits for people now. However, we also have persistent levels of poverty and disadvantage that we must continue to address. We believe that the progress achieved to date provides a strong basis for further delivery of the programme for government over the remainder of the period, and we are committed to continuing our work to ensure progress and to playing a strong leadership role in responding positively to any challenges that might affect progress. As Peter has indicated, we as First and Deputy First Minister lead on a number of commitments of cross-cutting and complex character that require agreement and coordination across the parties of the Executive. Although we have achieved much agreement, we have to address the significant outstanding issues such as maize long cash, age discrimination in goods, facilities and services, and making sure our ethnic minority communities feel safe and welcome, which we continue to work on. The programme for government is a statement of intent of what we in the Executive have delivered and intend to deliver for various reasons, whether through lack of political agreement or because of economic and financial pressures. We have not delivered on all of our commitments. We have not delivered on all of our commitments, and we have to hold our hands up and acknowledge that. Whatever our political differences, and they are many, I firmly believe that all of us are in politics to make things better and to improve the lives of all of our people. So we look forward to discussing all of this with you. Thank you.
Thank you both very much indeed. That reflects the very broad range of issues that fall under the department. I'd like to begin actually with the racial equality strategy, but before the question, an observation on the lead-in, which is to do with the relationship between the department and the committee, and to emphasise and stress again that every member of this committee is absolutely committed to a scrutiny role that includes advising and assisting the department in achieving its programme for government commitments. And on that basis, I want to acknowledge positively the work of the four of yourselves and the head of the civil service in addressing the issues of cancelled briefings and late papers. And there was a huge and very noticeable improvement. I just want to note that actually there has been a bit of a slide in the last number of weeks, and just express the hope that we start the new term after recess back where we were a few weeks ago, with things operating as they should be. The most recent breach of protocol actually was that the committee was not given advance sight of the racial equality strategy as per the protocols. I understand it was a difficult document to get together, and now I come to my question. Apart from the immigration piece, what is different, significantly different, between this new strategy you've just published for consultation and the old one that was abandoned 7 years ago?
Well, I think the first thing that we should note is that the strategy is out for consultation, and therefore it may well reflect any of the advice that we received during the consultation period before it is finally published. And of course we'd be very interested to have the committee's views on that. I do apologise if the non-protocols weren't kept. I do know that we were being under fairly consistent public pressure to have it released, and that we even took our own officials, I think, slightly by surprise because they hadn't got the web page set up properly to deal with that when it was published. It may well have been the lesser of two evils to get it out and to take the punishment from yourself rather than from the press and public. But I do apologise for that. I wasn't aware that that hadn't happened.
Observation rather than punishment.
In terms of the content, we obviously look for the reaction of people to it, and I have a somewhat sceptical view of strategies if they aren't backed up by actions anyway, and I think the more important element will be what actions arise from the strategy that will make a real difference. We are already putting a significant amount of money into issues relating to racial equality. The commitment is there from OFM, DFM, and I believe it's shared by the Committee and the Assembly as a whole. And we look forward to having the reaction of the public to it. I'm always reluctant when asked to comment too much on strategies which are out for consultation, because I don't want to put any parameters on what people may respond or any limits on how we might react to that. So if the Chair or the Committee has more innovative ways of dealing with some of the issues, we look forward to hearing from them and reacting to them.
I'm aware of one researcher who has taken the two documents, the old one and this new consultation document, and has noted an awful lot of cutting and pasting from the old document.
I think what you're saying is consistency.
Well, you can certainly call it consistency. But the question that it gave rise to this gentleman was, you know, if there's so much cutting and pasting, why did it take so long?
Well, I mean, with respect, I think that all of that is well and good, people having an analysis of the previous document and the present document. What's really important here is what comes out the other side of the consultation. And this is a real opportunity for the community as a whole, and there's plenty of time to do it, to engage in what is a vital piece of work. And we know that from the events of recent months, where quite clearly we have a problem within our society which needs to be addressed. And I think that now the publication of this document, the opportunity that it presents for citizens to respond and for key stakeholders to respond is now clearly there. So really, you would expect that what has gone out for consultation at this moment will evolve and change as that consultation continues, and what will come out the other side will in all probability be somewhat different from the previous document, but also from the present one.
You mentioned recent events, Deputy First Minister. I mean, I think you, like maybe others around this table, have probably been lobbied by the Islamic Centre with regard to a new cultural centre. As I understand it, what they're saying is, if it is appropriate, i.e. if OFM, DFM support other ethnic or minority groups financially or with resource, they would simply like a proportionate degree of help from OFM in terms of this new cultural centre, which would include a mosque. Is that going to happen?
Well, Peter and I are both on the public record that we will support the efforts being made by the Islamic Centre. And I know they've been at pains in the course of recent days and weeks to stress that what they're looking for is a community centre with a mosque as opposed to a mosque on its own. So yes, absolutely, we will look very favourably on their efforts and are prepared to commit financial support to them.
It might be worth it just adding to that. We already do give support to the Islamic Centre in terms of some of the community involvement that they have. I think about 2 years ago they came to see me looking for support, obviously not financial support, but support for the construction of their community facility, which I readily gave them. Martin and I have again endorsed their project, and we will give encouragement to it. I don't think that money is a big issue for them. They have a number of partners around the world who I think will assist them. I think what they do look for is government endorsement of the work that they are doing, and government support for the revenue elements which relate to community involvement.
We can move to the historical institutional abuse inquiry. I think we understand in recent days that Sir Anthony has been given a 1-year extension, which would suggest the report will not be with you until 2017. Given that significant delay, which we understand, are you giving active consideration to asking Sir Anthony to produce an interim report?
No, he advises against that. When a learned judge gives you advice, and is very well argued advice, both in terms of getting an extension and in terms of continuing uninterrupted with his focus on getting his final report. I think it's sensible to take it, particularly as you've set him up very much in an independent capacity. Obviously, we've handed over the responsibility to him. If he feels that there is value in any interim report or findings, he of course is free to do that. We wouldn't interfere in any way with that. But I think it would be difficult for us to instruct him and at the same time suggest that this is an independent report which he is entirely responsible for.
Well, I just think on a point of fact, when the judge advised us not to press for the start date to be the foundation of the state and to stick with the foundation of the National Health Service, we actually didn't take his advice and did press for the broader extension. But what, First Minister, do you say to people who are obviously not getting any younger and are desperate to hear the conclusions of this inquiry?
Well, quite simply that we have an independent judicial inquiry where I can assure you that the former High Court Judge Hart is not sitting on his hands in this issue. He's actively involved. He's been acting in the most responsible of fashions. I believe that there is a massive amount of confidence in him, and I don't believe that people think that he in somehow is prolonging the process, and they will get a much more thorough outcome if they allow him to do it according to the schedule that he has devised. I don't think I recognise that it does delay the process. If it could have been done within the timescale originally envisaged, that would have been great. But it cannot be done within the time frame originally envisaged without it being to the detriment of the outcome.
Well, we met with Justice Hart last week, and it was for the purposes of discussing the extension to the inquiry timeframe. And he obviously came reluctantly to the conclusion that an extension to the inquiry was important and needed to meet the purposes which the Assembly plainly attended. I have to say he made a very persuasive and compelling case for a 12-month extension to the time frame, and I do think that we're dealing with somebody. We're very lucky to have him as head of this inquiry. He's someone who I think is very sympathetic to the people who come before him and recognises the importance of trying to avoid as much as possible an adversarial approach which has been so roundly criticised in other inquiries elsewhere. So we don't underestimate the complexities of dealing with the whole issue of institutional abuse, and are obviously very sensitive to the needs of victims. That's why we took a decision to establish the historical institutional abuse inquiry, because we met at first hand with people who were victims, and it was they who made a very persuasive case that this institutional abuse inquiry should be set up. And I want to pay tribute to all of them, because it's heartbreaking to hear as they come out from giving their testimonies, the testimony which for many people is news of how they were treated in some of these institutions. So I think that we need to be very conscious that we're dealing with a very learned judge and someone who is very determined to expedite this situation as quickly as possible. And I think his concern were probably, and I obviously don't speak for him, centre on the prospect that being challenged to bring forward an interim report could actually be regarded by him as something that would be an interruption and a delay to the final report that he must bring forward, and is very determined to bring forward as quickly as possible.
Mr. Chairman, it might be worth saying in direct response to your last question, which was what do we say to those who aren't getting any younger like ourselves, Mr. Chairman, and who will be awaiting an outcome. The other side of that coin is what do we say to those victims who would not get a chance to put their case if there wasn't an extension, or if the extension was interrupted by having to do a report.
And I think everyone around the table understands why the extension was sought. It is a numbers game. But on that point of those who would not have had the opportunity to have the comfort of that inquiry, What about those who were abused but not in institutions? In other words, the abused who fall out with the terms of reference, and we're conscious of them, and we understand from a briefing last week some have come forward to this inquiry. Are they going to have to wait until post-2017 before you even consider what can be done for them, beyond going to the police or the social services?
That clearly represents a further issue to be considered by the executive, and given what has emerged from the Chewing Babies incident, you know, this is big stuff, as we all appreciate, and already in the period since the Chewing Baby story took off, even though it was in the public domain for some time, it took off as a really big story just a couple of weeks ago. Quite a number of people have come forward to meet with us who have been in similar situations and predicaments. All of this is going to have to be very, very carefully considered.
But what's the timescale for
Can
that?
we be clear that it's not a case of us sitting waiting for everything else to happen before we look at these issues? We agreed that these matters should be scoped out, and officials were tasked to do so, and I understand that there are joint protocol investigations involving health and the PSNI already into them. We obviously will take our decision when we get the advice from officials, but we're not sitting back waiting for anything else to happen in terms of the existing inquiry. They are being scoped out. I assume that you're talking about clerical abuse outside of homes, the Magdalen laundries, those kind of issues.
Right, I think that's certainly news to me, the scoping. Would it be possible for the committee to get a briefing perhaps in the autumn? An update on the scoping exercise?
Absolutely, yeah.
Excellent, thank you very much. Bronwyn McGann.
Okay, thank you, Minister, for your presentation. Can I ask Minister McCann to outline what the next steps are following the recent consultations on the children and young people strategy and the child poverty issue?
Yeah, I mean, whenever obviously we had set out to put out the Delivering Social Change consultation document, you know, we were aware that we wanted to engage with as many people as possible that were involved in that sector, and particularly parents of young children as well. So we're studying the responses of that now, and really I think that what some of the challenges that it's thrown up is because that document was concentrating specifically on children and young people who were in poverty, or whose families were in poverty. You know, that there were a number of concerns that came back that maybe it was a dilution of the 10-year strategy that's already there in place and will be in place until 2016. So we're looking at all that, and we wanted to reassure people, you know, that we weren't diluting, you know, the 10-year strategy, and we might have to look at decoupling the both, you know, in terms of having a specific strategy around child poverty separate from the 10-year or the beyond 10-year, and we'll be working together to do that. So those were the challenges that it threw up for us. We're still in consultation, and really, you know, what we're doing is to try and engage with the children and young people strategic partnerships and all those other groups that are actually helping us to inform any policy that we're going to be taking forward in that.
Okay, thank you for that. The chair had already touched on a question that I was going to ask, and it's regarding the growing concerns around the mother and baby homes, in particular the recent example in Galway. I suppose it's really just to emphasise the point that the executive needs to look at addressing, you know, the Magdalen laundry issue, which currently falls outside the scope of the current inquiry. So,
Well, just very quickly, that it's just to make the point that anybody who's under 18 that was in any institution is covered by the inquiry. But you're quite right to point out that, you know, those that were over 18 that were in the Magdalen laundries, the type style institutions aren't covered, and that's one of the options that the First Minister and Deputy First Minister mentioned earlier. But also just to say, you know, that we are looking at other institutions that wouldn't, you know, necessarily have been came to, and I know the Deputy First Minister, whenever the Chewing Babies became, the level of that was being exposed, that we did ask officials to go and to sort of scope out, you know, how many homes there were and I think it's something like 9 or 11 that have identified so far, but that's a work in progress. But we certainly, and also we're very, very conscious of the the people that are getting on in years, as you mentioned earlier. We met some of them earlier this week. So all that there has been taken into consideration when we're looking at a way forward in that.
I think it's also important to stress that thus far, even though more work has to be done, there isn't anything that would suggest that there's anything even remotely approaching the scale of what happened in Tuam. But as always, something could jump up to bite us, and I think it's very important that the scoping exercise that Peter spoke about is carried out by officials and by the police.
And finally, if I could ask Martin just to give assurances regarding the delivery of the A5 project. Like said,
well, I mean, the A5 project is it's an old chestnut, and our executive is absolutely committed to the construction of the new road. It has been obviously beset by difficulties, and the difficulties centre on the, in the first instance, I suppose, the economic downturn, which had a dramatic effect on the contribution to be made by the Irish government. It was effectively to be a joint project. So that was a major setback for us. And then, of course, as a result of the judicial review, we had a ruling directly to do with the European habitat situation, which has effectively meant that a whole new process has to be undertaken. First of all, to satisfy the courts, and then to go through the legal niceties that have to be dealt with in the context of facing into this project being effectively restored. But the executive is committed to the project. We regard it as a vital road, not just to Dublin but also to Belfast, particularly for people from County Tyrone, from Strabane, from Omagh, from the Ballygolly area. And I think that our hope now is that through the Department of Regional Development, who are involved in looking at this and who have responsibility for delivering it, that we will see a resolution to this problem. But it is unfortunate. It's very disappointing for all of us, particularly those of us who live in the West, that the project has been effectively been hit by circumstances which are outside of our control. The important thing now is to try to get it back on track again, and I believe every effort has been made.
And ahead.
Thank you, Chair. First Minister, you've already welcomed the increasing jobs, and in relation to the economic PFG target, what do you attribute the success so far, notwithstanding the challenging economic climate that we're still in?
Well, I think probably there are a number of factors. I think that it's very clear both the Deputy First Minister and I are very much pushing in the same direction, and if you have that enthusiasm around a target to achieve it, that helps. And I think our investment visits play an important role in that. I have to say that the department has done exceedingly well. DETI in this instance, and indeed Invest Northern Ireland. I know from having gone around for many decades to meetings that involved Invest Northern Ireland and the department, I think that we have got a level of effectiveness now that we did not have before. And I think that we're also helped by the level of peace and stability that we have at the present time. That the reputational damage that we've had in the past has made it very difficult for us to encourage people to come to Northern Ireland. We, in some ways, were probably helped, though it seems ironic, by the downturn. The downturn worldwide caused many major companies to start looking at their cost on the balance sheet, and Northern Ireland became very attractive in that context. And indeed, we know of jobs that were shifted from London and Paris into Northern Ireland because we had the skills and it was at a lower cost than it was in London or Paris. On top of that, I think it's worth pointing out that from a Northern Ireland point of view, we are outside of London receiving more income, direct investment than anywhere else. that it is of a very high standard, that Invest Northern Ireland have significantly increased the targets that they have had. I think it's about 50% better than last year. So it has been a good news story, though perhaps it would be a good news story if it was more reported than it is at the present time.
Can I ask something just in the back of that very briefly, Brenda? What are the percentages for London and for Northern Ireland in terms of total FDI?
I need to get Invest Northern Ireland. The statement is theirs. It is based, I think, on the size of population and area.
Yeah, but London could have 90%. We could have 5 and still be second, or it could be 50, 45.
Well, I suppose the real comparator is what is happening in Scotland, what is happening in Wales or elsewhere in England.
Okay, so Brenda, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. First Minister, you just talked about there about media perception, and given that we've heard this afternoon that 78% of our PFG commitments have been met, why is the media perception that the executive is not delivering?
Well, I think the media tend, and I don't want to go on a media bashing exercise, but they tend to determine a narrative, and then whatever the facts are around it is fed into that narrative. And I think that there is a narrative out there that the Assembly doesn't deliver, that the Executive doesn't deliver, in spite of the fact that we have some really good news stories to tell. The fact is that there are bad news stories as well. There are areas where we are not achieving what we would want to achieve. And if you give the media a choice of a bad news story and a good news story, I know what's going to be on the front page. So from that point of view, I think that it's not unusual for the media to disproportionately cover bad news. And I suppose in many ways, in the kind of system that we have, there are so many oppositions that there are an awful lot of people putting a negative slant on anything that happens in Northern Ireland, and it starts to become a vicious circle. Anyway, I think that there is one further factor, and again, and to use Martin's analogy of having to put our hands up, I don't think the Executive is particularly good at getting its own messages out. And that's something that I think we have to address. I mean, you can blame the media when they have 2 stories to choose from and choose the bad news. But if we're not putting the good news stories out or not putting them out in a way that's attractive to the media, then that element of the blame has to fall on ourselves.
Okay.
Just if I could say, I think that quite clearly the 78% is a huge improvement on the last delivery for the programme for government. But that doesn't mean that we can rest on our laurels. The fact is that there are areas where we need to find agreement so that we can improve that figure. And those challenges are clearly out there. But I do think that, people make judgments as to whether or not the process is working. And a lot of times by what they see happening on the streets. And that's why I think all of us are agreed that to find a way forward on things like parades and the past and the whole issue of flags and symbols and identity is of critical importance. I think you're judged more on the failure to get an agreement on that than you are on the successes within the 78%. And I think that represents a real challenge for all of us, and I think it's a challenge that we have to rise to. And yesterday we met and we agreed that we are going to go into a period of intensive discussions to try and find a way forward. People shouldn't be under any illusions about how difficult that is going to be. But I think that we have to approach all of these things in a positive and constructive spirit, recognising that any failure to get agreement will allow people to continue to judge in the negative as opposed to in the positive.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. I think we do just need to focus that we have already achieved 78% of our targets, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. The Deputy Chair, Chris Little.
Thanks, Chairman. Home Ministers, thank you for your presentation today. I wholeheartedly agree with the committee and with your contribution that the public will judge the Executive on delivery, and I think I agree with you as well. It is important that we communicate key achievements. The 78% is something to emphasise. Some of those employment figures that have been achieved are positives as well. I think within the department itself, some of the key actions around family support, early years education intervention, childcare, they're all positive key achievements. But I think there are also some key issues that do see significant delays, and some issues that do look more like inputs rather than outputs, as First Minister himself said, that strategies not backed up by action are concerning. So let me take the key goal of the programme for government in terms of building a shared community, and ask a couple of questions around it towards building a united community strategy, particularly around monitoring and then resourcing. You recently published new good relations indicators, which I understand will be used as a basis on which to monitor outputs of the towards building a united community strategy. Can I ask why you're proposing to remove any integrated education indicator, and whether you would consider, as the consultation response has suggested, reintroducing an indicator that would consider the percentage of young people in integrated education and the percentage of young people who have been unable to gain a place in integrated schools due to limited capacity?
Before I bring Martin in on that one, can I just deal with a general issue in relation to the 78%? I think if there's one lesson that maybe we have learned, and this is the second programme for government that we've brought forward. If you look at the programme for government, there are a number of issues over which we really don't have any control. And if you take them out, your 78% gets a lot larger in reality. For instance, Northern Ireland programme for government having something about greenhouse gases. Now, if I switch off everything in my house, do virtually nothing, it's not going to impact on those figures. So I think when you talk about maybe the programme for government target should be more about our inputs rather than outputs or outcomes, for that matter. Again, if you look at issues like suicides and accidents, you can have an input, and that input might have some overall impact on the issue. But you know, the number of people committing suicide isn't going to be affected that much by something that the executive does or doesn't do. So they don't have direct control over it, let me put it that way. So there are a number of the targets that we have. I think we have to be a bit more careful when we're providing a new programme for government, that what we have down as a goal or a target or objective is something that we ourselves have the capacity to deliver. And that hasn't been the case in either of the last two programmes for government. And if it had been based on the inputs of government to those issues, then I do take your point that you can have inputs or even outputs which are different from outcomes. And really, in terms of those things that we do have control over, it is the outcomes rather than outputs that are the important feature. I'll let Martin deal with the issue of...
Well, in relation to the good relations indicators, they were developed by statisticians in NISRA, and we didn't have a role in removing indicators. But I think it is important to stress that given the thrust forward on the need to accelerate shared education, the fact that the department has received 16 expressions of interest under the Shared Education Campuses programme and are working towards announcing successful projects before the summer break certainly suggests that this is an issue that's been taken very, very seriously indeed. And I think that the whole approach to all of this is to ensure that in the context of recognising the need to ensure that we bring together as much as we possibly can, not just through shared education, but also the very ambitious project of 10,000 young people in an integrated work situation. You can clearly see that there is a very ambitious programme before us. I think that in the context of the expressions of interest, we're all going to be very keen to see what they are, because quite clearly these are projects that will be not just for this period, they will be beacons of hope for the future, that we can further generate more and more interest in shared education. I mean, the First Minister and I are both on the record on countless occasions over the course of the period that we've been in the office together, which is now almost 6 years, where we have made it clear that if we were starting with a blank sheet, we would be absolutely in favour of a fully integrated education system. But we're dealing with the legacies of the past in relation to education. It's very important to bring stakeholders with us. And when there is an appetite, and there clearly is an appetite for the shared education project, then I see that as something that can be built upon and will move us forward in a very decisive way towards recognising that it is much better to have, as much as we possibly can, our children educated together.
You can't overstate. Just to come into that last, because I think it is an important factor, and we should be trumpeting from the rooftops. I remember when we brought out the proposals for the shared education campuses, and we suggested that we would have 10. You know, people very close to us were saying, where on earth are you going to get 10 applications for that kind of project? And here we are with 16 plus Lissanelli, which is 17 all together, and having to choose the 10 that we're going to prioritise. I think that shows the kind of appetite that there is for shared education out in the community. And I very much put, if we have a ladder of shared education, I very much put fully integrated education at the top of that ladder, and that's obviously what I would like to achieve. But as Martin has indicated, we have to deal with things the way they are at the present time. And I consider the shared education proposals a very significant step, though not the final step, in that journey.
I appreciate both responses, except what you've said, First Minister, but if I could focus in on the question to ask why the indicator was removed.
I think Martin answered that by saying we didn't remove it, it was NISRA who are responsible for providing the
surely
indicators.
You resource the Northern Ireland Life and Times survey with the questions that you want to use in order to monitor outcomes in relation to it. So surely you have the authority to request that indicator is inserted if you so choose.
Well, again, I'm always very reluctant to set aside professional advice. As the Department of Finance and Personnel is responsible for, but I'm very reluctant to set aside professional advice as to how questions should be asked in order to get the overall picture that we're trying to get to. And to some extent, the integrated education is now, if you like, bracketed with shared education in terms of what it means to our society. And you know, I'm sure it is possible for us to get the kind of answers that you're looking for without it being a Life and Times survey.
Okay. Well, it's not just me. It was a number of responses to the OFM DFM Good Relations Indicators consultation, and there were specific constructive suggestions put forward that could be used.
Well, we'll take what you're saying as a constructive suggestion as well, and I'll speak along with Martin to Simon Hamilton, who has direct responsibility for NISRA, but we of course have the responsibility for TBUC and how we evaluate that.
Okay. To move to shared education, you were discussing that as well. One of the specific proposals in TBUC for early years is a buddying system, and the department had made significant investment in a contested spaces programme, which funded a community relations in schools organisation called Community Relations in Schools to carry out a buddying system, one of which was with Holy Cross Nursery in North Belfast and Eden Dairy Nursery in West Shankill Road. Myself and a few other MLAs had the pleasure of meeting with some of the people involved in the project yesterday. It's bringing, I must admit, on announcement of the TBUC strategy, I was somewhat inquisitive about the capacity of a buddy system to have fundamental impact, but in speaking to the project and people involved in the project, it's bringing young children together in a meaningful way. Interestingly, it's intergenerational. It's bringing parents together from men together from North Belfast and West Belfast who admit themselves that it takes quite a bit of courage and leadership for them to take the step to be involved in that type of scheme, both from getting involved with their young children's education directly at the school and meeting people from starkly different backgrounds. My understanding is that in terms of resourcing, the Contested Spaces programme comes to a close in previous months. I think it was March, and this programme, which is a direct aim of TBUC, seems to be in some danger now, given gaps with Piece 3 funding, etc. Is it going to be possible to fill those types of gaps to ensure projects that are indirectly actually achieving some of the aims of TBUC are sustained and not lost, given the vital contribution that they're making?
Well, I'll let Jennifer answer on the buddy programme, but and indeed, if you want more details, officials are working the programme up at the present time and be happy to meet the committee on it. In terms of the financial issues, we are making bids against June monitoring, which we hope will be met. Also, the economic pact that we have with HMG envisages, I think, 50 million coming our way for TBUC style programmes and projects. So yeah, we're going to the economic forecast from the Finance Minister about the amount of funds that we have for the remainder of this year don't make easy reading, but I think we've said to this committee in the past that our two big priorities have been around the economy on the one hand and the reconciliation issue on the other. So it's an important part of our programme that we will be wanting to push when we come to June monitoring. Jennifer, do you want to?
Yeah, just in terms of the budget system, I totally agree with you. I mean, this is actually an expansion and a development of projects that were already there before. It's not a new project. It's called buddying, but I mean the type of projects there. And you're quite right in terms of it actually brings families together, not just the children from the nursery stage and primary school stage. It's intergenerational as well, that some of the older children buddy up with the younger children and that. And I think that what, in our opinion, it's doing, it's complementing early intervention programmes that are already in place within local communities, but it's also complementing the like of the FAST programme, for instance, that happens in schools, which brings parents. And you mentioned fathers in particular, because that's a particular target for the like of the FAST programme in terms of the fathers working with their children and all that. So what we're trying to do with the buddying system, again, as I said, is to bring those families together, but not just in terms of bringing them together for a short space of time, but we're also trying to build that sort of support mechanism around the family as well. So, whenever they need. But I have experience of some of the buddying programmes before it was called that, in terms of it was already operational in nursery and primary schools across community, and it has worked very, very well, and it's one of the real good models of best practice that we are building on at the minute and trying to expand on.
Chris, I'm afraid that, Chair. We'll try and come back if we can, but Stephen Madry's next.
Thank you. And can I, like others, welcome the very positive message you bring today, not least in relation to the economy and the many targets that have already been exceeded. I also want to welcome what has been said in relation to numeracy and literacy projects so far. Can I ask what has been learned from the rollout, and is it likely that that departments will mainstream if they continue to prove to be positive?
Well, obviously the evaluation of these programmes will be carried out probably further down the line. It will be of greater value, but I have to say that the initial reaction has been very positive. The literacy and numeracy one, I suppose it was very much I'm not sure whether you're allowed this PC or not, and I don't want to get myself into trouble, but I think this probably kills two birds with the one stone, in that it obviously has an impact directly in terms of the educational attainment of young children, and young children who were starting to fall behind. And at the same time, it helped us in terms of getting a lot of young teachers who hadn't found employment into the classroom. So on both aspects, it has been successful. The midterm testing suggests that the children who have gone through this programme have got a much better outcome than was the case before the project with other children. So that's a good, if you like, teacher level indicator of how the programme is coming forward. Though obviously we will look at the range of evaluation mechanisms that we have in place to make a more detailed study of it. One of the key things that I think we've learned is that it's critical to work collaboratively with other departments, and we set that at a very early stage. If you try from the centre to run a programme against the grain of a government department, it becomes very difficult. And I have to say that we have been successful in getting departments to run with the projects that we have centrally brought forward. And indeed, when you look at the like of the United Youth programme, you've got a minister who has seen what's happened in the first pilot that we have developed there, and is now looking at bringing some of his initiatives within the department under the same ambit as the United Youth project. That project, I think I indicated earlier, I think put 50 people through the pilot. They're now looking at a second and larger pilot involving 500 children. And the Minister for the Department of Education and Learning is indicating that they feel that they can ramp it up further. But all the soundings have been very positive in relation to the programme.
I think it's very important that we just continue to monitor the situation, and the Department of Education and the Department of Employment and Learning obviously are taking a big focus and paying a lot of attention to the success or otherwise of the employment of the 225 new teachers. But already it is quite clear that it is making a difference, and there's no reason to believe that it won't go from strength to strength. I've been in some of the schools that have actually employed some of these teachers and spoken to the teachers directly, and they're of no doubt whatsoever that it's making a huge impact on the increased levels of qualifications for the kids that they're teaching.
Okay, thank you. That's fine. Let it go, that's right.
Thank you very much. Alex Maskey.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation so far. It is important to acknowledge the good things that have been done over the last number of years, even though you say it's often difficult to hear that in the broader world out there. But obviously there are things which you both acknowledge that are still outstanding and do need to be addressed. One of the things that I had a concern, I'm sure you raised it earlier on, was just the concerns around those people who are particularly getting older, who have taken part in the HIA, and obviously they have expressed concerns, you know that, and you've addressed that. So just wanted to kind of echo those concerns that those people have, that the longer, you know, particularly in the context of an extension, makes it more difficult for those people who have maybe given evidence or made statements and so on. Just they're concerned about time, which they don't have maybe an awful lot of in the future. So I'm just echoing that concern because you've addressed it earlier on. Thank you for that. Two points or two questions I had, I mean, and they are around outstanding commitments. One is a simple and straightforward enough. One is the MLK. That's an outstanding programme commitment. We have addressed it here in the committee. In fact, we've taken it off our list because it goes nowhere. So I'd like some clear understanding where that's sitting. And then in terms of GFS, I mean, we recently took evidence from a number of organisations. All of the organisations which presented this committee around the GFS, from the Quality Commissioner, the Older Persons Commissioner, the Children's Commissioner, and a range of other organisations, have all lobbied heavily for children to be included in the GFS legislation. And it is actually putting pressure on some of the older people that we've been dealing with in terms of pensions, Parliament and so on, where they're getting worried and lobbying. So there's nearly like a divide and conquer going on at the moment. Not saying anybody's doing that, but that's what's happening. We're getting lobbies from people saying, well, okay, but children aren't included, what about us? And I don't think that's a fair position for people to be in. So certainly from our point of view, we would like to see the GFS legislation being inclusive and bringing young people in as well. I don't really see any logic as to why that wouldn't be the case. So looking to see what the formal response is from that.
Just on the first issue that you raised about the HIA, I'm pretty sure that Martin and I have done hundreds, probably thousands of meetings during the 6 years. And probably 90%, maybe more than that. If you asked me to give you a full report on what happened at the meeting, I couldn't tell you without going back and referencing it. The one meeting I do remember is the meeting when we met the victims of institutional abuse, and I'll not forget that meeting. I think it had a profound effect on anybody who was in the room, heard the stories of how people not just had to go through those difficult years when they were in an institution and faced the kind of abuse that they did, but how it had affected their lives thereafter. And it was no difficult task to convince either Martin or myself that we needed to be doing something to give these people an opportunity, to have their story told, to have someone make an assessment of how far it had penetrated into the institutions and what reparations, if any, there should be. And we set alongside that elements of care that we could provide to individuals immediately. So I do regret that there is going to be a delay, but I think that it is important that everybody who has gone through that experience in their life has the opportunity to tell their story, and it's better that we delay to hear everybody than simply bring out a report without having the full story. I'll let Johnny answer the questions in relation to the goods and services.
Yeah, just one addendum to what the First Minister said there. For people who are outside the scope of the inquiry, just so that it's crystal clear, that anybody who has been the victim of child abuse at whatever age can bring that to the police. And there's an immediate system in place, completely separate from the historical institutional abuse inquiry, which is a joint protocol system between police and social services to investigate that. And I would encourage people to do that because we know the high levels of recidivism of child abusers, and it is highly likely on an evidence base that those who have abused have gone on to abuse other children. So not even just for themselves in terms of justice for themselves, but also protecting other children. And there are child protection procedures and plans in place with police and social services. So it'll be absolutely clear to anybody out there who has suffered child abuse that they can make that report to the police, and it will be investigated jointly by police and social services to look at the criminal proceedings against what they have suffered, but also to look at protecting other children. And that goes on and is available to everyone. In terms of good facilities and services, I think we're committed to eliminating discrimination in this area. We have tasked our officials to work on that. We gave a commitment to the Pensioners Parliament that we would bring forward legislation in this regard, which we're currently working on the scope of. And subsequent to that, some agencies have contacted us, some of which you've mentioned there, Mr Maskey, about including children within that, and that's currently being scoped out. But in terms of what we're seeking to achieve, which is the elimination of age discrimination, work is underway to do that, and we can still do that. I came from a meeting with the age sector this morning, and we can still do it within the time frame of this mandate.
Just one thing, maybe Alex threw in on the side about the maze. Just to show that, no, I'm not going to go into it in great detail. You can settle yourself.
Why not say it?
Well, can I put this to you that we have actually met the programme for government commitment, but we have not met the milestones.
Indeed.
And this is one of the difficulties. The 78% you have is where we have met the commitment and the milestones. There are some occasions when we meet some of the milestones but not the commitment. Sometimes we meet the commitment but not all of the milestones. So we probably, when we're giving you a final report, need to expand on the areas where we have not reached the beyond the 78% or whatever it turns out to be.
But the bottom line, if you don't mind, Alex, clearly is that milestone 5 appears to dictate whether any of the other milestones are completed.
Yes, but the commitment, if you look at the actual commitment that was made, is one that relates to develop Maze Lawn Cache as a regeneration site of regional significance. You could argue that the existence of Balmoral Park and the involvement of the RUAS does that, but it doesn't meet the milestones that are set out beyond that. So,
and if you look at the risk register, you see every risk has a probability of 5, and every risk has an impact of 5, which is terminal. It's as bad as it gets.
well, there's probably one reason why we're not doing any more risk registers, because that takes us into an FOI question. If we can't internally diagnose ourselves without it being a matter for public commentary, I think it undermines what we're trying to do within the department. The risk register is something that's provided by officials. It isn't something that the DFM and myself prepare or analyse, because there are a number of the areas where I think, although they're not in the 78%, we have made very significant progress on some of the issues in terms of the milestones, but we have not reached the commitment, and again, vice versa.
Thank you, Chair. No, thank you, Fat. As I said, it wasn't an aside, it was a specific question on the MLK site and also the goods facilities, because I know Junior Minister is making the point there that it can be delivered within the legislative time frame left in this mandate, but what can be delivered? I mean, what I'm looking for is an answer which says we will have anti-discrimination legislation which won't discriminate against a big portion of the population under 18 years of age. So,
Yeah, the age sector, just to answer that specifically, asked us, and it was in connection with the elderly and older people, to bring forward legislation on goods, facilities and services. And we asked at the time, at the beginning of this mandate, do we have time to do it, to consult upon it, and to bring forward a quality piece of legislation for the older people's sector? And the response was that we could do it, and we committed ourselves to doing that. Now, subsequent to that, some people have come forward and said to us, for example, we now want under 18s included, and we are scoping out currently what can be done in connection with that, as well as a concurrent piece of work, which is to make sure that the goods, facilities and services discrimination against the elderly can go ahead and can be legislated within this time frame. We will look at the scope of the under 18s. Just to give you one example that was raised of some of the complexities when you move towards under 18s. Some of our secondary schools have counsellors within the secondary school sector. Our primary schools don't. And there are questions then that if you then move towards under 18s, because I mean there are some ridiculous things happening for our elderly people where they're being charged. One person went from £300 to £2,100. It sat in my office this morning, from £300 travel insurance to £2,100 travel insurance. He doesn't have any condition. His GP signed him off as being fit to fly and to take part in the holiday, but because of his age, he took on an extra £1,800, which more than, basically took an additional holiday to him. That's what we intended to eradicate and to drive out. Now, when some people come in and say, now we want you to look at under 18s, then potentially you're into the situation where a primary school can say, well, there's no school counsellor here. There is for the secondary sector, therefore if you bring this legislation through, you have to provide one for here. And these are extremely complex pieces of work. In terms of what we committed ourselves to doing, we can do it, and our officials are working on it, and we still have the time frame to do it. And concurrently with that, we're looking to see what scope there is to include for under 18s, but it is a more complex piece of work.
I think both DFM and Junior Minister McCann have indicated, I'm not sure on which area, but
I just want to, so as a follow-on from what Jonathan was saying there, because, your point is well made, and other people have made the point. If we're taking forward a piece of legislation that's dealing with discrimination and start discriminating against a particular sector, those are the points that we have listened to in our consultation. But in terms of the Robin Allen, who's a barrister, was commissioned by Nikki and was commissioned by the Equality Commission, and he very clearly said, or did a piece of work there which indicated that there is ways that the legislation could be written in and could be brought forward that would actually allay the fears that people would have, the same fears that Jonathan has just outlined in terms of parental responsibility and all, those other issues in terms of making the difference between certain ages and that. So I think that there has work already been done in terms of doing that and bringing that forward, and that's another part of it as well. But certainly, I mean, the time frame's still within our reach. I think it's still being discussed the way forward, but certainly all those points, particularly in terms of when we are bringing forward legislation around discrimination, we can't really be looking at discriminating against a particular age group either. So all that is in the mixer, and Robin Allen's informed opinion was something, as I said, that piece of work was taken forward, and you know, hopefully will be put into that debate as well, in that discussion.
Okay. Deputy First Minister.
Yeah, well, I was going to deal with the issue of Mary's Long Cash, because obviously there isn't any political agreement on the way forward, not just between the First Minister and myself, but obviously the chair of this committee, acting in his capacity as the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, did play a major role in ensuring that the milestone of the construction of the Peace Building and Conflict Resolution Centre wouldn't be constructed on that site. When we talk about the milestones, I was always working on the basis that the initial move onto the Maze Long Cash site would entail the new Balmoral grounds, the move by the Royal Ulster Agricultural Society from the King's Hall to Maze Long Cash, which I have to say has been an absolutely enormous success, given the numbers that have turned up last year and again this year. And I take great pride in that. I think that it was very, very important that that move would happen, because we had all hoped that that move would have paved the way for, you know, the warming up of the site. You know, it was seen by many people as a cold place, as a place that maybe wasn't capable of regenerating. But our understanding was that not alone would that represent the beginning of the project, that the Peace Building Conflict Resolution Centre would also be part of the initial move. And that didn't happen. And I understand, whilst I don't accept, I understand that within the DUP and the Ulster Unionist Party and other unionist associations, parties that were previously in favour of the project were turned against it. And that does present a major problem. I still haven't given up. I think that there is work to be done. I want to see that site developed in the interests of our people, providing thousands and thousands of new jobs. But at the same time, we need to find a solution to the problem. And we're not going to find it at this committee meeting today, but certainly we will continue to work at it in the hope that we can find a way forward.
Okay, I appreciate that. George Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. And can I commend the team? Excellent work that you are doing, and the whole executive as well. Whenever we see many large sporting events have been brought to this area, it's nothing but positivity. And I can't understand whenever you look here, 78% of the targets that have been met, and yet no, the media and so forth are still portraying us as like a backward country or something. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. But again, thanks to yourselves, you're doing a very, very good job. I have 3 or 4 questions here. The first one, obviously, it's they're all parochial ones in relation to
All politics is local, George.
parochial, very, very parochial. The Shackleton Barracks site, I was wondering what the update, or could you give me a complete update on it? Now, I do appreciate that the Dard headquarters are to move into it maybe in the next couple of years or so forth, but taking that into consideration, we're talking about a 760-acre site approximately. And what plans are there for the rest of the site? Is there expressions of interest? And when will they be coming on stream? That's some of my questions. Maybe hard ones, but
no,
ask them
the
anyway.
department did ask for expressions of interest, and while on the previous occasion when Martin and I intervened to stop the site from being sold, I think there were only a couple of people at that stage had been interested. On this occasion, there are 39 expressions of interest. They range from people who principally want it for farming purposes and therefore it would only add 1 or 2 people to the employment register in the area, right through to those who will be bringing hundreds, indeed some will be bringing thousands of jobs, according to their prospectus. The amount of money being offered varies from very little to renting to shared outcomes with OFM, DFM, right through to people who are offering 7-figure amounts. So there's a wide range of possibilities within it. And even as I look at the intention of some of those who have submitted an expression of interest, I could see how some, indeed several of them, could be put together because one would not do violence to the other. As you indicated, it's a very large site with about 1 million square foot of buildings on it, so it has massive potential for the Northwest as a whole. Where it sits at the present time is we have the expressions of interest. We are being provided with a paper which will look at the options. DARD would not be the only government body who has an interest in some part of the site. I think Water Service have an interest in part of the site as well as the private sector interests. So it is being moved forward. The Deputy First Minister and I are to have a meeting shortly with officials to look at which of the options they should be pursuing. But it has a very significant potential for the area.
Yeah.
If I could just add to what Peter has said, because Peter and I have both visited this site at a time whenever a lot of people were expressing scepticism as to what the site could be utilised for. And I think whenever the announcement that was made that DARD would relocate to the site, there was still a lot of scepticism as to whether or not any other enterprise would open up on the site other than DARD headquarters. It is quite clear from the expressions of interest that this is one of the most exciting prospects that we have under our tutelage. And in my opinion, if developed properly along the lines that Peter has spoken about, this will provide thousands of new jobs for people in Derry, Limavady, Ballykelly and Coleraine for the whole of the Northwest. So we intend to be very sensible about how we approach all of this to ensure that we get the best result out of it. It is an absolutely massive site. It is a fantastic site and it is bursting with potential, and we intend to develop it to its full potential.
There is massive anticipation in the area as well for when, and people keep asking me when is it going to open up and so forth. But I do appreciate and I do thank you for both of you for your answers. Could I, Chair, with your indulgence, just 2 or 3 other questions. McGilligan Prison question I had asked a few days ago of the Justice Minister. We were sort of led to believe that there'd be an upgrade there, but it was a bit negative the other day about it. What exactly is happening to the prison? Are we going to see a new build, or is that out of the question at the moment?
Well, you did the right thing in asking the Justice Minister, because he's the one that has the detail and responsibility, and he has not shared it with the executive thus far. So if there are financial implications, no doubt he will be doing that when we get round to budgetary issues.
Yeah.
But he hasn't discussed it with us thus far.
And the Dungiven bypass and the A26, I know there are roads issues, but when are they coming on stream?
We haven't got a paper from the Finance Minister or from the DRD Minister indicating what the programme is. We will have difficulty over the next number of years with our revenue budget. There will be a bit more room, hopefully, for manoeuvre in terms of the capital budget. But a question was asked earlier about the A5, and the money that was to have been used on the A5 has been used for other purposes.
Yeah.
Therefore, if the executive is to keep its commitment on the A5, that means that available funding then goes into the A5 when it becomes available. So it's part of that overall jigsaw that I suspect would be very difficult for the DRD Minister or the Minister of Finance to give you a precise answer to that question now.
One of the reasons that I mentioned that I'm given bypass, and obviously the Deputy First Minister realises himself, just from a health point of view, there's massive risks there to the people that lives in Dungiven itself.
Well, absolutely. I think there's been huge disappointment down the years, and many of the ground cited centre on people's health in the village, and that cannot be underestimated. And I do think the Minister for Regional Development, looking at working out his priorities in the time ahead, really has to consider that time is long overdue when there would be a bypass at Dungiven. You and I travel through it every morning when we come to Belfast, and it's absolutely appalling on occasions. Trying to get through it on a Friday afternoon, you know, it just takes so long, it clogs up the whole village, and you can imagine the amount of fumes that are going out into the atmosphere. So I hope that the Regional Development Minister does recognise that this has to be a huge priority.
Same with the Process Road. From a potential of accidents, there has been so many accidents has happened in it. I do appreciate that should be coming on stream maybe shortly as well, but it's one that needs, in my opinion, needs pushed.
Well, I mean, we all know that the constructions of roads entails huge sums of money, absolutely massive sums of money.
Appreciate that.
And like all other departments, I have no doubt that the Minister will be prioritising the projects. I certainly think that, you know, from a local perspective, from your own perspective, it's absolutely appropriate to argue for these developments. But at the end of the day, it'll obviously be dictated by the funds that are available from the executive. It's not that people don't believe that people in Dungiven are entitled to a bypass. We all would love to deliver the bypass tomorrow morning, as we'd like to deliver the A5 tomorrow morning. But in the case of the A5, it's more complicated by the outcome of the judicial review in relation to Dungiven. It's certainly my hope that the Minister will recognise that the people of Dungiven are entitled at long last to a bypass around their village.
Thank you.
Thank you. Leslie Cree.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon. I realise the time's a bit tight. Social investment. The Delivering Social Change Fund, the C, has some £118 million in it at the moment, and of that, 92 is available during the current CSR. Can you give the committee some flavour of how that's likely to be spent and what sort of the nature of the expenditure is going to be?
Well, in terms of SIF, first of all, I think we have committed ourselves to £26 million of investment, and we expect that the final letters of approvals have been given to various schemes when we identified the £26 million, but the actual go-ahead with the terms and conditions of expenditure we're expecting to go out relatively soon. Delivering social change programmes, we've talked about a number of them already today. I'm sure we could provide you with a breakdown, but as you know, the initial allocation for SIF was £80 million, and there's the business cases are being considered, so when they flow through, that would be £80 million. How quickly the economists get through the £80 million, I'm not quite sure. I think there's something like £12 million, wasn't it, on childcare, which brings it to 92, 26. We have already identified on delivering social change. Where does that take me? 38. That's probably it. That's the division of the £100-odd million.
So is that timescale in the programme for government going to be met?
Well, in terms of the SIF, the 16 projects are now at final letter offer stage, with letters due to go out in the next couple of weeks. And we expect that all 56 projects will be at final letter of offer stage by the end of the year, subject obviously to the relevant approvals and funding being in place. So the 80 million remains ring-fenced for the Social Investment Fund, and I think it's a very encouraging story. that this is effectively going to move very quickly now.
I think we do need perhaps just to make the point that 112 would need to be topped up, and we have been seeking some additional funding.
That's my next question for you, actually.
I've answered it.
Before they call, I will answer it.
Under the European Regional Development Fund, I understand there was a bid pending for capacity building, really, part of social change. Has that happened?
I expect that that's one of the bids under the June monitoring round. That's before, well, the first paper has gone to the executive. My experience of monitoring rounds is that several iterations are required before we have a final document.
Okay. If you don't get the money, how will that affect the programme?
Like any other project, if the money's not there, it slows the project down. But I can tell you that as far as Martin and I are concerned, we put a very high priority on the delivering social change projects, particularly where they touch on matters that relate to community cohesion and the reconciliation issues. So from that point of view, there would be a fair bit of weight, I would imagine, being applied when it comes to the monitoring round.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Can I finish with hopefully a couple of quick-fire questions? Mid-term review in the programme for government, when will that?
Fingers on your buzzers, is that?
Yeah, more or less. Yes, okay. Yes, Robinson, First Minister. When will the mid-term review be conducted?
Mid-term review
of the programme for government?
Well, we already have been carrying out the mid-term review. We had meetings, when was it, last week or the week before?
Last week. Yeah.
So it's ongoing?
Yeah,
okay.
it's underway.
The implications of this mandate running an extra year, effectively, what are the implications for the programme for government and the budgetary process?
The draft is being prepared of a revised programme for government, which will include some new, not already included commitments, as well as revising some of the existing ones because of the extra year.
Bit of tweaking required because of that.
Tweaking?
Yeah.
Will there be consultation?
Not tweeting,
yes.
tweaking.
Yes, just clarifying. Will you be consulting, and if so, with whom on that?
Yeah.
Yes.
How broadly?
Well, it'll certainly include the committee.
Yeah,
I think
said
one
that
thing we
without
don't
moving
want
his
to do
lips.
is to go out to a public consultation, because by the time that would be over, half the period of the extension would be over. So when no decision is taken on it, it's fairly likely that that will be more of in-house consultation.
Okay. And finally, what can you tell us about June monitoring, and how serious is the financial situation around that?
It's in brokerage at the moment. That's all we can tell you.
But we can't tell you that the expenditure requirements are greater than the money available.
But they always are, as you well know.
But on this occasion, it's serious.
No, on this occasion, there is a bit of wheeling and dealing to be done, as is always the case in the context of monitoring rounds. And hopefully we'll get the outcome which will be satisfactory.
Okay. We shall leave it there. To all four of you, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Appreciate your engagement, and enjoy your summer.
Ambitious.
All right, no.
Out over the Glen Sheet, given.
Up the amateur and M&O.
Thank you.
Or the elaborate beyond his notes.
Check it.
Right. Okay.
Okay, members, to continue then, we go to item 3, which is chairperson's business. Just to read into the record, I suppose. We've already had a discussion before the meeting began, informal session about strategic planning. We set aside Wednesday the 3rd of September. I think there had been some discussion about going to the Crumlin Road. It's not available. I thought we might go out of the city, and Ranfurly House in Dungannon is available.
Okay, very good.
And if members are content, I would like it noted that even as chair, I have bypassed the opportunity to recommend Strangford constituency so that we can go to Bronwyn's place. Are we content with Dungannon?
I think we'll get a map for that, Chair.
Oh dear
And
me.
Sure, you're bypassing Craigavon on the way to Dungannon.
We might stop if you're going to offer coffee. So, Ranfurly House, happy enough? Okay. Just to note, yesterday Brenda, Jimmy Spratt and I attended the Black and Minority Ethnic Parliament event upstairs. A lot of, I think, new groups, apart from this, there were a lot of groups. Some of them are new and emerging. I thought it was really worthwhile, and I would like to think that we'll think about further engagement with those groups, because they are genuine about trying to understand and get entry points into the Assembly. Page 7 is a letter from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. They'd like an opportunity to brief us on findings from a recently published report they put out where they were examining the economic mobility of ethnic minority communities here. There's a copy of the executive summary on page 9 of your packs. It informed the consultation on the racial equality strategy, which the department has just opened. Would you be content to think about a briefing from Joseph Rowntree Foundation early next term?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, good. Page 13 is an invitation for the Irish Refugee Council and Law Centre. It's to Chris and myself to attend a roundtable event at Stormont Castle on Friday the 27th of June. The title is Seeking Asylum on the Island of Ireland. Now, I'm not going to be able to attend that. In fact, a lot of people may now be engaged in talks, processes. Chris, do you know how you're
I
fixed?
think it's unlikely I'll be able to attend as well.
Anybody else? Or would you like it emailed out, members, so you can think about sending somebody? Okay. Committee's current invitations are on page 15. And barring comment on that, we move on to the draft minutes of our meeting of the 18th of June, which is on page 17 and thereafter. Are we content to agree the draft minutes? Thank you. Matters arising then, page 24. There's a consultation document for the racial equality strategy, which is called A Sense of Belonging. This was published on Thursday. It was emailed to members on Thursday afternoon. It closes on October the 10th. And the department is saying it will undertake public consultation meetings in Belfast, in Derry/Londonderry, Dungannon, Craigavon, Newry and Ballymena. And as I pointed out to the ministers under the protocol, we should have been given prior notice, but this did not happen. Having raised it with the ministers, do we feel we really need to write, or should we leave it at that? I'd be content to leave it, having taken it directly to the principals. Thank you. Page 110 then is outstanding correspondence. And just to highlight some of the correspondence at page 113, there's correspondence from the department giving us information on its provisional outturn for 2013-14. The letter indicates that overall resource and capital underspend was 1.094 million, or 0.91%, and that's against an executive target of 0.5 of 1%. We're also advised the financial transactions capital loan, which went from the Strategic Investment Board to the University of Ulster for 25 million in financial year 13-14, is being treated as annually managed expenditure, AME, and that there's been a write-down in the value of the loan of nearly £5.5 million. So what do we suggest, members? Perhaps we write to the department to seek clarification.
It's be interesting to hear how you can write down a loan.
Are we content that we seek clarification on what's going on there?
Yeah.
Thank you. Then table packs, page 3, a response from the department regarding queries which we raised with regard to financial transaction capital This was following a number of issues raised by Assembly Research. Again, are you content to copy the correspondence from the Department to Assembly Research for their information? Table Packs 27, you'll find a response to our queries arising from the June monitoring briefing. And for information, members, we were due to get a briefing next Wednesday on the annual accounts for 13-14. However, we're being advised by officials the accounts will not be laid in the Assembly in time for the briefing next Wednesday. So it's been suggested that the accounting officer meet with myself and Deputy Chair Chris on Friday the 4th of July to discuss the annual accounts, which will be followed by a briefing for the committee in full in September if necessary. I think, Chris, you and I will be here anyway.
Okay. Yep.
For the other process. Members content with that approach? Thank you. Page 118 of your packs, we've got a letter from employers for childcare on the childcare payments bill, which has been forwarded by the Committee for Finance and Personnel. The legislative consent memorandum has now been laid in the Business Office, and a copy is in your table papers at page 31. Under the provisions of standing orders, the resulting LCM will not normally be moved in plenary until 20 working days after the day of referral to the committee. And this allows time for us to scrutinise the proposals. But with the onset of summer recess, we are actually somewhat restrained in this regard. So officials are due to brief the committee at our meeting next week. Could I suggest we consider inviting employers for childcare to provide a written briefing for that, so that you have that information ahead of the briefing from officials? Okay.
Chair, is there no way to take an oral briefing from employers for childcare?
Well, it is not impossible if it's the will of the committee. And I have to say I will be absent next week, so I don't feel I should be offering an opinion beyond what's the will.
I'd be keen to hear from the chair, even if we have to impose a very strict time limit on it for business reasons. The key issue here seems to be the introduction of the tax-free childcare scheme is possibly repealing the employer-supported childcare scheme, or otherwise known as childcare vouchers, which is quite a significant proposal.
Yeah, I think it's a question of having surety in your own mind about what the impact is and who is advantaged and who is disadvantaged potentially.
Employers for childcare are an authority on these issues, so even if it needs be to have a strict time limit, I think it would be very helpful to hear directly from them.
What sort of timeline are you talking about? So 15-20 minute briefing, or
20 minutes? Yeah, half an hour. Yeah. 20 minutes if that's what we're working with. Better than nothing. Yep.
So yes, that's a yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Page 122, correspondence from the Committee for Enterprise, Trade and Investment to the Department. This is in relation to a report produced by the Competitiveness and Employment Desk Officer entitled Opportunities and Key Policies for Social Enterprises in Northern Ireland 2014 to 2020. In the absence of comment, I suggest we note and move to page 124, where there's correspondence from the Committee for Enterprise, Trade and Investment in relation to the Green Investment Bank, and again, in the absence of comment, I suggest we note. Page 37 of table papers is correspondence from Savia. And in the absence of comment on that, members will now move to our second briefing, which is from departmental officials on progress towards the implementation of the recommendations contained in the independent assessment reports on the Victims and Survivors Service. The last briefing we received was from the board of the service on the 7th of May. We considered written correspondence from the service at a meeting on the 4th of June, and then wrote to the department to ask for specific comment on a number of concerns at this briefing. So, in your pack at page 127 is the clerk's brief. Behind that, correspondence from the service, including the notification sent to MLAs on Financial Assistance Scheme number 6. Also, previous official reports from briefings with officials and the service, and the summary and recommendations of both the independent assessment reports. The department has provided a briefing paper. It's included in your tabled papers at page 39. And a copy of the committee's letter requesting specific information with regard to this briefing is included for information at page 49 of tabled papers. The Corporate Risk Register did not copy across correctly to members' meeting packs, so it's been included again in tabled at page 51. So we invite to the table Ricky Irwin, Patricia McIntyre, and also joining us from the Victims and Survivors Service is Linda Mervyn.
From the department, sorry, Linda.
From the department?
Yes.
From the department's Victims and Survivors Unit?
Yep.
Gotcha. Okay, you're all very welcome. Ricky, are you going to make any opening remarks?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, Chair, members, thanks again for inviting us back to give you an up-to-date position on where the department is with victims and survivors. Since I last updated the committee, there have been a number of developments. I'll start with the new structures which have been introduced to monitor implementation of the recommendations and advice emerging from the independent assessment of VSS and from the Commissioner for Victims and Survivors. The Victims and Survivors Programme Board has proved useful in supporting decision making and encouraging communications between the Department, the Commission and the Service. As detailed in its terms of reference, the Programme Board has considered and discussed advice provided by the Commissioner for Victims and Survivors on addressing issues within the VSS and agreed a framework to monitor implementation of the recommendations emerging from the independent assessment, including the Commissioner's recommendations. The Programme Board has also monitored and reviewed the services offered to victims and survivors through the VSS, taking on board the views of the Commissioner and the victims' representative who was on the Programme Board. It has also improved communications between the Department, the Commission and the Service. In particular, the Programme Board has overseen the delivery of early changes in the VSS and has agreed a strategic plan to address the structural problems within victims and survivors services. Now, as members of the Programme Board agreed that it had delivered on its terms of reference, and in light of the CIPFA recommendations that it should stand down at an appropriate time, at May's meeting, members of the board agreed to its ceasing with immediate effect and agreed different structures to monitor and oversee delivery of the changes which the VSS need to undertake. However, it is important to continue to reiterate our commitment to implementing in full the 70 recommendations presented to us following the independent assessment, which has also included the Commissioner's advice alongside that. To this end, progress against implementation of the recommendations will continue to be regularly monitored. We appreciate the value of the input that both the groups and individual victims and survivors make, and we will continue to ensure that the Victims and Survivors Service engage with them and other key stakeholders during the implementation process in order to deliver the best possible services to victims and survivors and to ensure that any changes being made are the right ones. The committee will be aware Catherine Stone has left her post as Commissioner for Victims and Survivors, and I would like to take this opportunity to put on record my thanks to Catherine for the work she undertook here and for the clear independent advice she provided on matters affecting victims and survivors. I appreciate the important role of the Commissioner in promoting the interests of victims and survivors, and that it is therefore essential that the incoming Commissioner is in post as quickly as possible. Additionally, to ensure the views of victims and survivors are considered, we have consulted with the Victims and Survivors Forum on the skills and qualities needed for that particular role. Their views will be taken into consideration when finalising the necessary skill sets for the appointment of the next Commissioner. In 14-15, the VSS will continue to provide funding to individual victims and survivors through the Individual Needs Programme and to victims groups through the Victims Support Programme. Ministers have agreed that a financial assistance scheme will operate this year, and VSS has put in place the necessary steps to make this operational. Scheme 6 financial assistance has opened in 2 phases this year. Phase 1 is for the seriously injured, and Phase 2 is for all other applicants, both existing and new.
VSS held information sessions between the 2nd and the 6th of June in 8 locations across the region to advise individuals how to apply. These were advertised in the press, on the VSS website and via VSS-funded organisations. In relation to schemes 1 to 5 for 14-15, the VSS have consulted over a prolonged period with both the Victims Forum and the Commission regarding the criteria for the schemes. Issues were identified and the Forum was unable to agree to the initial set of proposals and expressed these views to the Commissioner. I have asked VSS to submit prioritised proposals on the schemes for Minister's urgent consideration. I understand the frustration and anxiety felt by victims due to the delay in opening these schemes, and therefore the importance of ensuring the schemes are opened as soon as possible. I can advise the committee that the Department has now received this week further proposals, and these are currently under urgent consideration. And going forward, we will continue to ensure that VSS directs funding to those victims most in need of support and services. To support this, the Commission is commissioning research to evaluate the effectiveness of both the Individual Needs Programme and the impact of the Victim Support Programme, which funded groups. The recommendations from these reports will inform funding for victims and survivors from April next year. That concludes the opening statement, Chair, and I'm very happy to take any questions that you may have.
Okay, Ricky, thank you very much indeed. Maybe start with resignations, because not just Catherine Stone, the chair of the Victims and Survivors Service Board, I see on the website, said he's resigned from his position. A statement on the 23rd of June. What can you tell us about that?
The Department received Peter Gay's resignation on Friday of last week. Peter has decided for personal reasons to step down from the role of chair and from the board completely. Other than what you see on that statement, I have no more information on that. Obviously, the Department will want to move very quickly to act, and we have two processes. We want to look at how we can bring forward the role of an interim chair, and then alongside that look at a more long-term solution for a new permanent chair.
What about the process then for an interim chair? How does that work?
Well, at this stage all I can say is that we're in discussion with the remaining members of the board, and the remaining members called an emergency meeting yesterday, and I'm just waiting on further feedback from that, see what their thoughts are.
I don't need to tell you the WKM report stated that, quote, the difficulties being experienced by the service can be traced back to the failure to have a fully constituted board in place at the time it opened for business. Led to a serious lack of management oversight and strategic leadership. This negatively affected performance, delivery, and importantly the culture within the VSS. So you cannot overestimate how unfortunate it is that the new chair has gone. And within that context then, I mean, I do recall SIPFA saying that the programme board should stand aside and let the VSS board get on with its role.
That's right.
But actually, perhaps this is a time more than any other where the VSS board isn't in a position to work and does need the support of the programme board.
Well, obviously these are very recent developments. The department will move very quickly to bring forward the appointment process for the remaining new board members. That process has already commenced. We are very shortly about to go to public advertisement for further board members. In light of the chair's announcement, we now, as I said, need to look at the arrangements for the chair. So that has been looked at right now.
So how many board members are there at the moment?
Three.
Three. How many are you hoping to have, including a chair?
The recommendations from the SIPFA report said that ideally a number of between 8 and 10 board members would be desirable. We're moving to have a board of around 8 in place. That's the intention.
So the lower number? Any particular reason why you're going for 8 rather than 10?
Well, I think that's the minimum requirement. However, I don't want to preempt the appointment process. We don't know the level of interest that there'll be. we'll have to see how that process goes. If there are further suitable applicants who come forward and meet the selection criteria, then that will have to be looked at. And just to say, in relation to the selection criteria, obviously in light of the independent assessment report, one of the things that we've been doing is looking at the skill set for the role of a board member. We had taken some advice from Peter Gay before he left on his view as to specific skill sets. There are certain requirements around governance and finance, and it's likely that the skill sets will be strengthened in those areas when we go out to seek further members.
And you also made reference to skill sets for whoever will replace the Commissioner at the Commission, and consulting with the Victims Forum. I mean, certainly over the years you've had Catherine Stone before her, you had 4 commissioners including myself, and I remember part of our interview process was presenting to FM, DFM and the junior ministers specifically on leadership. Before us you had Bertha McDougall, before Bertha Sir Ken Bloomfield. So that there should be quite a body of knowledge built up in the department in terms of skill sets that have been applied and how appropriate and inappropriate they have been. Are you learning? What are you learning from the forum?
We've consulted with the forum, and that was facilitated by the Commissioner for Public Appointments office here. Their input has been very useful in terms of identifying the specific criteria, requirements, and individual person specification that they would like to see when the advert goes out.
And what are they?
Well, again, it's back to having, alongside what was already in the original adverts from the last competition, there are some suggestions around increased knowledge of public sector funding, governance, accountability, those sort of areas. We're still in the finalisation process of that, so I didn't bring it with me, but I can't go into any further detail on that until that's been agreed.
Okay. There were some victims representatives in the building this week, and they expressed a concern that there would be that the department wouldn't be bringing forward a new commissioner this calendar year. Can you allay those fears?
Well, obviously there are processes that we need to go to in relation to appointment of a new commissioner. The appointment process itself will be regulated by the Commission for Public Appointments. We wanted as well to consult with the outgoing commissioner in terms of her views on the criteria. What I can say is that I would hope that we will go to public advertisement on that particular post very soon. Now, however long that takes.
What is very soon?
Well, I can't give you a date. But very soon we hope that will be out. Now, but depending on the length.
Sorry, Rick, but I mean very soon. Does that mean within a month?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Roland McGann.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Regarding the new structures to oversee them, to monitor the implementation of the recommendations coming out of the independent assessment of the VSS, could you give us further information on that?
Sure. The new structures include a monthly victims and survivors update meeting, and this is attended by the Commission and a representative from the Victims Forum, alongside OFM, DFM officials and special advisors. The meeting is primarily based on a report that the Commission provided in advance, which is about what is working, what is not working, and what actions need to be taken, specifically by the Department and Ministers. Immediately after that Victims and Survivors Update meeting, OFM, DFM officials and special advisors meet and agree the resulting actions which are required. Alongside that, we still have the standard governance mechanisms of the accountability meeting, and they are occurring on a monthly basis. But specifically in terms of the new structure, once it's been agreed what actions are required in terms of, say, the independent assessment report or any other concerns that have been raised, I would write to the chair of VSS, which we have done on 2 occasions now, outlining the specific issues which have been raised by the Commission at the meeting. And I would then expect that we would receive a response in detail from the chair or the board in relation to those issues and how they're being taken forward. And then we would review those at the next meeting the following month.
Okay, regarding the membership of the VSS board, when do you hope to have that process completed?
In danger of repeating myself and saying we hope that process is going to start very soon, certainly within the month, hopefully a lot quicker than that. It may take maybe 3 to 4 months to go through the process of advertisement, interview, and then recommendation of a suitable list of candidates.
Okay, just a general question. How do you feel that you are managing changes within the VSS?
Sorry, say it again.
A general question.
Yes.
How do you feel that you're managing changes within the VSS?
Well, setting aside the fact that the chair has, for personal reasons, stepped down, we feel that there's been good progress made across all the recommendations within the independent report. The report, of course, is not the only thing here. There are a number of other considerations. We've been working very closely with both the Commission and the Service to bring forward further changes. It's fair to say there's a lot more work that needs to be done. Not all the recommendations have been implemented. The majority of them sit with VSS itself. Some of them are very key issues and will require more time to get right. So if I can give you an example, one of those would be the health and wellbeing review, which was going to take over from the individual needs review, the INR process. That again is a process that the Service has consulted with the Forum and the Commission on. Proposals were brought forward. Unfortunately, the initial proposals weren't up to the required standard. This view was expressed to VSS, who have committed to urgently come back with further proposals. And in fact, this week I know that they have confirmed that they will be consulting again with the Forum on a revised health and wellbeing review format in early July. Other issues around revisions to the schemes. I mentioned earlier there were some issues around the initial set of proposals to revise those schemes. There's been close consultation with the Forum and the Commission. I asked for a revised set of proposals to be put together as a matter of priority. We have received those just this week, and we're looking at those urgently, and we'll be putting those to ministers as well. So there has been huge developments in terms of implementation of the recommendations, but there remain some key issues that we need to continue to press.
Thanks.
Deputy Chair, Crystal.
Thanks, Chair. Try and be quick with a few things here. Financial Assistance Scheme 6. One of my key concerns was how it was going to be communicated publicly. The detailed action plan here says one of the actions was to issue an advert to be included in regional press week commencing 19th of May. The objective to ensure that the opening of the scheme and the information sessions are advertised in a medium available to the wider public. Can you add detail to what exactly that was?
Sure, okay. So I mentioned previously there were 2 phases to...
In a short way, because I've got a number of questions.
Right, okay. Well, the first phase was in relation to seriously injured as a result of conflict-related
I don't
injuries.
need the phased approach. I just need what the advertisement in a medium available to the wider public looked like.
Well, I don't have a copy of that with me, but I do know that the VSS issued a self-declaration form to all those who received the scheme last year.
But that's not the wider public, so you don't know how it was advertised to the wider public then?
I know that they held a number of information sessions, and I believe that they were advertised across the press. There were 8 locations.
That's what I'm trying to ascertain, what that advert actually was. If you don't know, that's fair enough, but if you get updated as soon as possible, that would be helpful, because I think that the communication to existing people seems to have been done reasonably well, but I think one of the key concerns I had, and that had been communicated previously, was people who have never heard of this ever before. How do they find out about it? So it would be good to know what the precise nature of that advert in the regional press looked like, what press it was carried in, etc., etc.
Well, maybe if I illustrate by telling you the numbers of people who have applied, including those who are new.
How many new people have applied this time around?
Okay, so there are 300, and there were 368 new applications issued, and 322 new applications have been received for phase 2.
Okay, that's positive. The other issue was advert re the scheme opening. Okay, that's the same thing actually. Ensure the opening of the scheme information sessions are via medium wider public. Okay, you can give us a bit more detail on that. The other concern was that about the resource is, given that you have an idea of applications to date, although my understanding is they're open until the 30th of June. Have you any idea at this stage whether, I think it's 1.8 million, is going to be enough to honour all of the applications that have been received?
I don't have that detail in terms of whether it will be enough. Whenever the closing date has been reached next week, we'll check that with VSS. I mean, the process that's been agreed is that the seriously injured have already received payment. Once the phase 2 is closed, the number of eligible applications, they'll have to look at that, determine that, and then look at what's available from the 1.8
Those
million.
are two key things I'd be keen to know as soon as possible.
Okay.
What that public advertisement looked like, where it was carried, and whether there's enough resource to return all the applications. In relation to victims groups funding, the Parliament previously advised that Victims and Survivors Service had been asked to produce a paper for the VSS Programme Board, or VS Programme Board, regarding the impact of the cessation of Peace 3 funding for victims and survivors groups. My understanding is that that impact is already severe. Have you received that paper, and what were the key findings and what actions are going to be taken in response?
Well, the Programme Board did receive a paper from VSS in relation to the work that the board had commissioned VSS to do. VSS identified a number of groups who are in receipt of VSS funding, but also in receipt of peace funding. That is still under consideration within the department. I won't name the groups involved. There is no it wasn't actually a bid or an application process for additional funding. It was merely a request to assess what the impact would be across the services provided by those groups. There are one or two of those groups where the peace element of the funding is fairly substantial. So the impact will be, once their funding comes to an end later this year for peace, services there will be affected.
You said later this year. For many of the groups, is it not already stopped?
My understanding was that most of the peace funding would end later in the calendar year, but maybe
I would suggest this is another serious issue that I appreciate much more detailed information than that on what exactly the nature of the impact the paper says is going to be, and what's going to be done in response. I mean, my understanding is you're talking about 4 or 5 groups here that work with thousands of victims and survivors, and who are seriously concerned for the welfare of those people in the absence of funding.
No, I understand that, and the issue of peace funding coming to an end goes beyond just the victims and survivors sector, and it needs to be considered against other wider budgetary pressures as well. So, I mean, yes, it is a serious concern for those groups involved, but in terms of commitments to provide any additional funding, there is no commitment at this stage, particularly when we're waiting on the outcome of June monitoring.
Well, that'll be sterling reassurance to all those people that are really concerned about what's going to happen. Okay, final question. The victims and or the outgoing victims commissioner provided advice with regards to the possibility of a troubles-related serious injury pension. Can you give us a response to that advice and any update with regards to consideration of that proposal?
Well, this issue was raised by the Commissioner in her advice paper dealing with the past, a victim-centred approach, and that was submitted to ministers on the 8th of March. We recognised that there was a considerable amount of interest and backing in the sector regarding the issue, and appreciated the valuable work which was undertaken by both the Commissioner and the Forum on this. That advice paper remains under the consideration of ministers in the department at this stage. I can't go any further than that.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
Chair, could I just ask, arising out of the Vice Chair's comments on the actual monies or lack of them, has a bid been prepared for the June monitoring round? Are you aware?
Yes. I believe that the committee received a briefing from finance colleagues on the 4th of June, which outlined all the June monitoring bids, including
That was 3 weeks
those for
ago.
victims.
That was 3 weeks ago.
Well, my understanding is the
Still
position
okay.
in terms of the bid hasn't changed since then. It's just that there's no outcome of the June monitoring process yet. I can go over the detail of the bid if you so wish.
No, that's okay, as long as it's still in there. Thank you, that's fine.
What are the risks, though, Ricky, if the bids are unsuccessful?
Well, the risks are, of course, that it means that VSS would not have the full budget for delivery of its programmes, and we would have to ask the VSS board to look at the impact of that in terms of delivery of those programmes. And that's all I can say really at this stage.
And that would be, at this stage, 3 people, as opposed to the 8 to 10 that these independent reports say would be the ideal.
Well, what that would be 3 board members as opposed to the 4 that there were up until Friday, but I accept the point that there are
4
additional board members who need to be there. But if I could just say in relation to that point, the remaining board members are very keen as an interim measure to bring on. They're looking at options while the recruitment process for additional board members is running. One of those options is perhaps looking at a series of advisors who would come onto the board with no decision-making authority, but rather we provide them with additional financial and governance expertise.
I'm not having to go. I just think it's not a great. Obviously, it's not a great situation where you're dependent on June monitoring, which is going to be, I think, is going to be extremely tight, and then you don't have the number of people you would, in an ideal world, have looking at it for you. But it's okay. In your briefing papers, ownership and time frame for implementation of recommendations, you break it down very usefully. 54 with the service, 7 with OFM, DFM. How are you on your 7?
The 7 with OFM, DFM are all implemented.
Right. 2 with Department of Health.
The 2 with DHSS PS, I'm not overly, unless I might have it here actually. I'd need to check that.
Okay.
Colleagues know.
Also, then, in terms of time frame,
Hold on, we can give you an answer on that.
Well, the 2 with DHSPS, we are currently working with them just to progress it forward. We are looking at them in relation really to the moving forward with psychological therapies, and we have been working closely with them. And I think as well we have been trying to get information to them so that they can further develop proposals on taking that forward.
Yeah.
and in terms of time frames, I think there's one that says due to be implemented by March 2015.
Yeah.
But otherwise, this calendar year seems to be the target.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Final question, Ricky, would be, Chris has mentioned the pension for the physically injured,
Yes.
and I know the Wave Injured Group has been lobbying all the parties in terms of that. The other issue, which I've mentioned wearing another hat, is the mental health and well-being piece, which I think is absolutely critical, not just for individuals and families, but communities. When I first put that into the public domain, I was told that the department was looking very seriously at a major initiative in this area. What can you tell me about the thinking that's going on?
Well, well, there's a number of things there. We've been working very closely with the Department of Health and the Health and Social Care Board. There was the immediate issue around a number of individuals who'd been identified by VSS as requiring stage 2 psychological assessment. That was dealt with swiftly. Those individuals, a specific process was set up to have them triaged within the health sector and any appropriate treatment put in place. So that was done. In terms of the medium to longer term picture, we've had a number of discussions with officials in health around how mental health needs could be provided through the health sector. There will be a lead-in time to that. Part of that work The Commissioner undertook to facilitate a roundtable discussion on the future provision of trauma services as well. Now, unfortunately, the Commissioner herself was not able to hold that discussion before she left, but we'll be picking that up with the Commission in terms of that broader discussion, and that, of course, will feed into the development of any services from next year.
Right. So would it be fair to say, rather than having an initiative at this stage, there is a scoping exercise?
Well, we have firmly tasked health officials to actually take it further than that, to actually look at a specific business case which would cost this out. So the work is moving on that. Yep.
Okay. Members content? Okay, Ricky, and
Okay.
Patricia and Linda, thank you very much indeed.
Chair, before you move on to the next item, can I suggest that we maybe write to FM and DFM just to ask about that gap in funding for victims groups? It seems to be a significant number of groups who communicate that it's a significant number of people that they work with are going to stop receiving support as a result of this cessation in funding. And it doesn't sound to me like there's going to be an urgent response to that from the department or the service.
Yeah, I'm not against it at all, Chris. I just wonder whether, with June monitoring to be decided, whether we should wait, because if it doesn't go victims' way, I think that's going to be another serious lack of finance.
Does anybody, this is probably a piece of string question, does anybody know when June monitoring is going to be finalised?
Oh, I think very soon.
Should be next week.
Yeah.
But there is speculation about us being recalled because it has to go through the chamber.
I've blocked that week out.
Yeah, well, you'll be here anyway. Believe me. Shall we wait or see how June monitoring pans out?
Yeah.
Okay. Members, rather than taking an oral briefing on the sexual orientation strategy, we decided we'd take a written briefing. This was received on Tuesday morning, 11:30, so it's in tabled packs from page 54. The Department are advising us phase 1 of the consultation, which was to enable OFM, DFM to gather information, evidence and public opinion on what the final strategy and accompanying action plan should include. That all finished, that phase 1 finished on the 6th of June. There were 600 plus responses to an online questionnaire, and a further 300 responses came in writing. The Department are advising us a significant majority of the written responses were from individuals opposing the development of a sexual orientation strategy. Significant number opposing.
I would just note these briefings today, Chair, just kind of absorb them.
Well, could I suggest we need to think about a briefing from officials, an oral briefing early next term?
Because they have to weigh these things up. You know.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If we're content on that, then there was also a written briefing on progress in relation to the active ageing strategy. A written briefing was provided by the Department at 4:32 p.m. on Tuesday afternoon, and again, therefore, is in table papers at page 60. Again, shall we note at this stage and think about an oral briefing in the autumn?
Agreed.
Thank you. So, draft forward work programme, page 220 of your packs. If there's no comment, can I just remind members that we're seeking comments in relation to the report on the Barroso Task Force to be in with committee staff by 4 p.m. tomorrow. Any other business? Okay, members, as I said, I'm out of the country next week. So Deputy Chair will be in the chair for the meeting. So as that's the last one before recess, could I, perhaps on your behalf, thank the clerk and the committee staff, the committee office, for all their work, and the DALO, who doesn't have the easiest job in the world. And thank yourselves for being such brilliant committee members, and wish you all, hopefully, a pleasant and peaceful peaceful summer. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.